welcome everyone. I'm Simon Shapcott. I'm Net Zero Transportation Director at AtkinsRealis. I'm moderating the panel today. And as you can see from the title, it's about fixing the roof before the deluge starts, creating and maintaining climate resilient transport infrastructure. So as it suggests on the tin, this is a climate adaptation resilience session. And I just wanted to give a quick brief introduction. So, I mean, at times over the past day and a half, we've heard some quite gloomy messages about the climate and its potential impact on transport. And I think unfortunately for good reason. That's because global warming is getting worse. We're unlikely to hit the 1.5 degrees C target. In fact, the Climate Change Committee have said we're not going to hit it. It's already probably passed. Globally, there's a big gap between emissions that are emissions reductions needed and what's being offered by countries to meet not just the 1.5 degree target but higher targets as well. And of course, at the back of this, the Met Office, of course, are projecting hotter, drier summers and warmer, wetter winters, and those projections are probably likely to get worse. That's the gloomy piece, which you would have heard, but what we wanted to do was do a bit more of a positive take on this, and say actually you can get on top of some of these challenges. So this session is about really understanding and anticipating sort of climate change risk and how you can inform decision making sort of going forward, so you can sort of prioritize your interventions, whether it's design or engineering, about how you manage your maintenance over time, and so you can really then adapt. And so ultimately you can look to manage and then those events when they occur, so you can withstand and recover from events when they occur. Like I said, this session will be focusing on that anticipate part. So we have about an hour, or just under. I've got three wonderful panelists with me. I've got Charlene Caten, the founder and director of accelar, and she's been working on the High Speed 2 and climate change risk there. We've got Cara-Marie O'Keeffe, also from AtkinsRealis, a senior climate adaptation lead at ours. And she'll be discussing Transport Scotland work she's been doing on a trunk road adaptation plan. And finally, we've got Subu Kamal, head of product management from TRL Software, who'll be talking about the challenges around data silos and what this means for climate change going forward, or managing climate change risk going forward. So a good mixture of panels, talking about essentially authorities trying to get on top of these challenges, or transport infrastructure providers trying to get on top of these challenges. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Charlene, if you'd like to take the podium.
Thank you very much. Great, thanks everyone. I am Charlene. I co-founded accelar. Our mission is to accelerate the green transition, and for us that means kind of looking at nature recovery, decarbonisation, net zero and climate resilience, which is what I'm here to talk to you about. I think we've heard over the kind of last couple of days a real understanding of the problem, which is the climate has changed. We are experiencing many more extreme weather events, and we will continue to do so. Maybe that's kind of very high rainfall, storm events, maybe it's very high temperatures, or the kind of extremities of temperatures. And it's how our infrastructure network is able to deal with and absorb that change, or where there's vulnerabilities, we know the network won't be able to continue to be resilient. So we have to think about understanding where those problems exist. In order to do that, we think about kind of what's the likelihood of it happening. We can use lots of different data sets to start thinking about where flooding might occur, when it's likely to occur, under what scenarios, and the different climate projections. And then we think about actually what's the impact. We can look at impact from a very quantitative approach. Are lots of road users using a road? Is it a very critical piece of infrastructure? The number of rail users. But actually, as you get more sophisticated with the methodology, it's actually thinking about the criticality in terms of things like interdependencies. Is that piece of rail, if that stops, or it's interlinked and interdependent with a substation, electrical transmission line, there are then systems of systems approaches you need to think about. And actually, there might be a road that isn't that well used, but it only serves one community, and they're cut off. So actually, that criticality of the losing that infrastructure and how we value infrastructure might not be a pure numbers game. I think that's something we might mature more as an industry to understand better going forward. So the way that I've approached it to date is a risk assessment process and looking at that likelihood and the impact, and therefore, where's the vulnerability across your network? So this kind of just takes you through our assessment process. We've called it ACRA and kind of labelled it as a whole service area. So it's accelar's climate risk assessment process. And it very much goes through a typical assessment process, but you've got the inputs, which are kind of very vital, and the quality of your inputs to then stand in ultimately what the impacts are. But we look at all the latest policy literature review. I touched on interdependencies being quite an area we know about, but we need more work and understanding how they really link together. Do the clients we're working with have adaptation plans, and how do we feed that into the methodology? Then you've got the actual climate parameters. So areas like flooding and water are much more well established, but other ones say wildfire and where's the chance of that happening, and wind. They're areas where we've got some information, but hopefully over time we'll get enriched with that data, but they act as our climate parameters. And then when we actually have a client we're helping, they will have a spatial geographic area they're looking for, and you can pinpoint in much more detail the climate and the climate projections for that area. So we start to build up a baseline of what we think the picture looks like. Take a coastal area in the northeast will have very different projected impacts to somewhere, say, in the southwest. And then it's the information from the client itself. We want to take as much information as possible. Some clients will just have very kind of basic outline shapes. Others might delve more into really understanding their assets, but that gets added in. Once you have all of that, it then goes into a big matrix, which essentially takes all those elements, thinks about the different metrics you're measuring against, and ultimately comes up with a RAG assessment scoring, so you can begin to understand where on your network there might be more vulnerable areas. So we have provided for different clients an output is this matrix, and you'd be able to look at the assets, or if you've got a long corridor, a rail corridor, you might want to break it down into 5, 10 kilometre lengths, and you'd be able to identify along those lengths where we think it's most vulnerable and why, what's the climate parameter that's affecting it and affecting it over time. And then we have some mapping to go with it. So I have 3 examples here of how we've been able to use our approach with different clients and at very different scales. So you can use this methodology to really drill into small areas. You can use this methodology to think about broader areas. The colourful image is the West Midlands Combined Authority, and we were looking at their hotspots across infrastructure, nature and the capacity of nature to deal with resilience and people. How does it affect the most vulnerable people, young, old, hospitals that might cater for those individuals, and then the infrastructure network as well. The middle one is a commission we did with Midlands Connect, where we looked at a more specific transport piece of network. And for this one, we also then incorporated opportunity areas. So whilst we want to highlight the vulnerabilities, if we see that there's opportunities to actually find maybe a quick win, there might be an obvious solution for a nature-based solution if there's flooding issues, or there might be co-benefits. So actually, if you make this part of the road or rail more resilient, it's right near to electrical transmission line, and actually there's a co-benefit of that one. That piece of infrastructure becomes more resilient as well. And then the final image is Transport for the North. We've been doing this at a much larger spatial scale, and this is just an image of increased wind speeds that we're showing up here, which then links to kind of HGV lorries, electrical transmission lines, and where there might be more vulnerability in that area. Where we then wanted to take it, we often found, we were able to present all the vulnerabilities and kind of map out these are the areas we think you should focus on, but actually we wanted to create something that was a bit more powerful, something that perhaps wasn't as static, and it became a platform in which you can build upon it and your methodology can evolve as more information becomes available. So, you might over time want to add in more of those interdependencies, or you might want to think about adding in other interfaces and understanding really the critical impact of certain infrastructure. So we work with a partner, Sim Analytica, and use their platform to create a very powerful software-driven approach to looking at this. So all the various different metrics have been added in, so maybe tolerance to heat, obviously flooding, thinking about wind, lightning, all gets added in, and will quickly kind of, against each asset, spout out your risk assessment scoring. And then what we've been able to do is kind of test this through a proof of concept project with HS2, which is called ADORE, which is, it stands for Asset Demonstrator of Resilience and Exposure. Where we are now is we've taken it through the first stage, and we're really looking at them understanding their current asset base, where potentially they might need future adaptation, thinking about design standards, and then also thinking about the maintenance schedule. Are there efficiencies, and thinking about how you maintain them becomes kind of an important part of this evolution. So bringing this from, we understand the vulnerabilities and where you might need to adapt, to actually this becomes somewhere where you can add in more information and make that a maintenance schedule as well. So yeah, in summary, I guess we've taken a risk assessment approach to first understand the vulnerabilities. It's very much like a first step, and we know that then there will be other things that you want to add in. Particularly, I've mentioned this systems of systems approach on interdependencies, and a big one for me is that social impact and who's really being impacted by networks when they fail. But I'm sure we'll move on to that a bit more during the discussion. So thank you, everyone. I think Cara's next.
Afternoon, everyone. So today I'll be talking on the Trunk Road Adaptation Plan that we produced for Transport Scotland at AtkinsRealis. So a little bit about me. I'm a senior climate adaptation consultant at AtkinsRealis and a geographer really by trade. So I'm a chartered geographer of the Royal Geographical Society, really interested in spatial climate risk and sort of really understanding geographically where climate is causing the most issues. So the purpose of this presentation today is really to give you an overview of the Trunk Road Adaptation Plan. You'll have to forgive me in that it hasn't actually been published yet, so I can't share everything, but hopefully we'll give you a good overview. So Transport Scotland has a vision in regards to climate change adaptation and resilience, and that is really a transport system which is well adapted and prepared for current and future impacts of climate change. Safe for all users, reliable for everyday journeys, and resilient to weather-related disruption. So I think really key there is that people element, and it's about everyday journeys that are going to be impacted by climate change. So our approach, we basically followed ISO guidance on climate risk assessment. This is best practice across the industry. So you work through from your problem definition, through to your climate screening and climate risk assessment, and then on to adaptation planning and adaptation monitoring. And you'll see the lighter blue bubbles throughout is that stakeholder engagement element. That's really key. It's all well and good us producing maps of climate risk, but if we don't ground it in truth from stakeholders, it's not going to be useful information. So I'll take you through each of the steps, starting with the problem definition. So the Trunk Road network in Scotland is a really important piece of infrastructure. It's a lifeline infrastructure, and it's also worth a lot of money. So in 2023, the asset base was valued at 27.6 billion. So very important to protect against climate change. So as Simon mentioned earlier, climate change in Scotland is becoming warmer and drier in summer and milder and wetter in winter. And these trends are only going to increase in future as extreme events become more frequent. So the positive side of that, appreciate that's a lot of doom and gloom, is the trunk road adaptation plan. So it's really imperative to understand where and how badly the network is affected by climate change in order to produce adaptation planning and a monitoring plan. And the image just at the bottom is just an example of climate change already impacting the road network. So this is a landslide on the A83, and this is the Rest and Be Thankful. It's sort of a beauty spot, very popular for tourists. So yeah, you can see the devastation there already. So the baseline screening, we took a GIS approach, so a very geospatial approach. We created a hex map across all of Scotland's trunk road network. This is around a 2 kilometre squared area per hex cell. And we looked at risk in terms of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, and looked at 8 climate hazards. So we wanted to do a very comprehensive overview rather than singling into one particular hazard. And this methodology is in line with IPCC guidance. So the results of the baseline screening, I think unsurprisingly for us and from speaking to stakeholders, surface water flooding, landslides, and river flooding sort of came out as the top risks in terms of climate screening. And this is really using Met Office observation data, so had UK data on temperature and rainfall and other variables. The map to the left shows a combination score of all of the 8 hazards. We did this to look at hotspots of risk across the network. So you can see in red, the hex cells, that's sort of where you're seeing high hazard scoring across all of the 8 hazards. So especially to the south, you're seeing that on, I think it's the M74? Yes, the M74. So then we look into the future to see how is that going to change. We use the latest UK CP18 projections. So this is 2018 data. These climate projections tend to be updated every 8 to 9 years. So it was UK CP09 was the last version. And this is to really understand future changes in likelihood of a hazard occurring, and also the impact. So similar to Charlene, we looked at likelihood and impact. And the map on the right is a landslide map. So we produced a future climate map for each of the key hazards. So you're seeing quite an obvious geographical trend for landslides, especially to the east of Scotland. This tends to be where it's sort of high topographical areas and heavy rainfall. And just to note, this is RCP 6.0, so that's sort of a medium to high emission scenario. So you're looking at around a 3 degrees warming by the end of the century compared to pre-industrial temperatures. And we're probably on course for that currently if policy doesn't move in the right direction. So this wouldn't be an unreasonable view of the future by the 2050s across Scotland. So we came up with a risk scorecard, I think a very similar picture to the baseline screening. I guess the only key difference is river scour moves up into a higher risk. The arrows denote sort of the magnitude of change. So I think most things are increasing with the exception of heavy snowfall and ice. You're seeing that as that temperature rises, that risk becomes lower, but it's obviously still a key risk across Scotland, so it's still coming out as medium. And the sort of the largest magnitude increase is coastal flooding on the trunk road network. So moving to something a bit more positive, what can we do about these climate risks and hazards? Transport Scotland really wanted us to come up with a clear method of adaptation planning and a monitoring plan as well, in line with their ACAR vision. So we have action themes and enabler themes. I won't run through everything, but just to highlight the 3 bottom areas. So we've got net zero targets, environmental benefits, and easy wins. So those low-cost, no-regret actions. So we could really highlight to Transport Scotland within each of the many recommendations what also will have co-benefits and is in line with the net zero agenda as well. So what is key about adaptation is it's not something that's static. We can create a report and sort of bring together a load of recommendations and outline it for Transport Scotland, but they need something that they can keep looking back on, say, every 5 years and keep monitoring. So we pulled together a list of monitoring recommendations, and some timeframes of how often this should be reviewed. So just to pull out some key ones, so Transport Scotland already have an asset management performance system. We thought it was really key that the data entry into that slightly improved, and then you can understand how assets are either deteriorating over time with climate change, and then you can target it with adaptation actions. Also key here is that collaboration piece, speaking to other companies, so SEPA, Scottish Water, Network Rail, local authorities. Transport Scotland doesn't work in silos, and it needs to talk to their neighbours as well. So hopefully, in summary, I've given you a very quick overview of Transport Scotland's upcoming trunk road adaptation plan. Hopefully it will be available online for you to view, and you can drill into our methodology a little bit more then. I think key for me on this project was that stakeholder engagement piece. We had workshops throughout the process. It wasn't just us sitting and doing mapping. We spoke to operating companies, maintenance companies, a range of stakeholders from Transport Scotland as well, which was really key. And just to acknowledge the Transport Scotland team for letting us speak on this today, all the workshop attendees, and this was not just me working on this project, it was a large team across AtkinsRealis, UK and India. So many thanks to all on screen. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Subu, and I head the product management function at TRL Software. And as part of what we do, we take 4 solutions to the market, 4 types of solutions. And one of them is called iRoads for digital road asset management. And I'll spend next few minutes to share some experiences in implementing that relevant to climate resilience. So I'll talk about 3 points: why the importance of data in climate resilient network, why collaboration and open data is key, and what is possible if we have that kind of data and systems in place. So first one is, we all know we cannot manage what we measure. John's report yesterday and the talk went into great depths about it. 52% of the local authorities are having surface flooding in 2023, and there's a huge amount of data, but how that data can be used for further funding, planning, how you get a shared understanding of risk, there is more to be done. So data is key, is the first point. We cannot measure, we cannot manage what we cannot measure. And if you have good data, it helps you to shift from just crisis response to risk prevention. Without that data, it is not possible. And that kind of data should be centralized, standardized, and accessible and usable to enable sort of risk prevention strategies. So this is image most of you might have seen here. So the most important sort of message from my talk is around collaboration and open data. So our data, climate risks are not related to strategic road network or to specific road network. It doesn't respect any boundaries. But we have a lot of boundaries within organizations, between assets, between regions, which sort of prevents that data sharing and further actions around it. Now, when I say collaboration, it's sometimes a little bit fussy. It's abstract. It can mean a lot to different when you come from different perspectives. So, but collaboration essentially starts at national level, then it goes to regional level, then it goes to institutions managing the road network, and then it comes to asset types and asset classes. So I'll give a specific simple example. It's not pointing a finger at any of the organizations discussed, but so this, if you Google, and some of you might know it, you have the National Highways Performance Dashboard with open data published. And I will just give you a glimpse of this one, a well-maintained and resilient network. So if you go to the site and you'll see, this is one of the indicators, key performance indicator, KPI3 as what we call, across different regions. And what it essentially is saying is 23, 24, the national 96.2% of the payments are in good condition. Yeah. So this is all good, yeah, across the strategic road network. But payment condition is good, but what that means is this is the next slide. Yeah. So this shows the condition of another asset called drainage, okay, which is not very great. And you can see that Southwest region, it's 59 is the performance indicator. And if you go to Southwest here in the pavement, it is 97. Yeah. So what does that mean? So it is still at the highest level. It is not possible to see the performance of the network at a higher level. It's all still dependent on asset type. So this is an example where a collaboration between asset types within an organization can improve. So there is between drainage and between payments, there is no relation. But you can see individually. But it doesn't really need to be like that. There are systems, platforms, like what we take into iRoads, which brings together multiple assets and give you that view. So this, although this talks about carriageway, you can have an integrated view across the network, which covers all assets similar to this. So that was a specific example, but it's not. It's across all organizations. National Highways is we work internationally, Australia and some developed countries also. And National Highways does a very good job, but still there is room for improvement. There are data silos within organizations. That was an example. So between organizations, between regions, that is critical for taking actions based on data. So if we have that kind of data, it will help us to do proactive infrastructure planning and management. Maintenance management can be based on data. There is a shared view of risk, which is what is missing right now. Everybody is looking at their own specific particular assets and their budget. And then if we have that open data and that shared view of risk, then only we can start using that input for resilience funding. So that is key. So if you don't have the data and that systems in place, it's really challenging to get the resilience funding in place. So this is some of the experiences summarized from our implementations across the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. It's really, really enlightening, some of those, some of the risks we're facing, some of the challenges we face across data sets as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a panel session, some Q&A from the audience. I'll start off with a few questions, allow the audience members to sort of gather their thoughts on what they might like to ask. So first of all, I was quite interested in, just generally across the presentations, it's not just a technical challenge, it's an organizational one as well, and how you sort of structure your organization, especially your decision making, to incorporate climate risk assessment and understanding what your risk and vulnerabilities are. What in your view, what does sort of embedding this in decision making look like? Sort of where and when? I'll start with Charlene, if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly organisations that want to think about it really early, and perhaps they're looking at their, future strategies. So you have very proactive, I guess, stance. And then you might see, and I guess there's also the governance piece. They might have to do reporting as part of their role, but you can do that in different ways, and people might want to get more of a front foot on doing stuff, whereas others might then maybe out of necessity have to be more reactive to things happening. If you're thinking at a local authority level, they've got enough going on and they have to actually maintain the assets. When assets go wrong, they have to be the ones doing it. Do they have the time and the kind of the bandwidth to even think about, okay, we'll ignore the stuff happening now when the issue's right here. Let's plan for 20 years' time. So for them, embedding that into the process, they probably want to do it, but maybe they don't have the capacity to do it. And yeah, that's probably one of my thoughts on that.
Thanks, Charlene. And Cara, particularly, I suppose, from the Transport Scotland work you're doing, similarly, like how are they embedded into decision-making processes?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think it almost goes back to the point of business continuity plans, where you've got those emergency response measures already in place. It's working with what you've already got, rather than piling on loads more regulations and policies for organisations to comply with. Really integrating it, say, into your business continuity plan, looking into the future and seeing where projections are going. If that emergency happens more often, how are you going to handle that as an organisation, and really having those plans in place? And I think also key is financial planning as well, and planning for these events to become more frequent. Budgets are obviously very restrained, but at least having an understanding of that is really key.
Thank you. I'm also really keen from your data perspective, Subu, to just understand, you've clearly highlighted challenges there of data sets collected separately. From an organisational perspective, like how would you bring those together to inform decision-making, generate analysis and inform that decision-making?
Yeah, again, funding is key, and without the right data, decision makers and practitioners really can't take quantifiable, justifiable decisions. So again, it comes back to data and the leadership, and the leadership has to sort of start the collaboration beyond organizations and bring together data sets and have cross-institutional sort of frameworks in place. It's not one institution's and one organization's problem. Yeah. So it just the collaborative nature of working needs to really come up. It's not a technically we can solve all sorts of issues in terms of different disparate data sets and standards and all, but it's that leadership and thinking that needs to start.
Okay. So collaboration being key, essentially, and how we draw, how we remove those barriers. Interested, Charlene, just reflecting on something you mentioned, and I think Cara, you mentioned it too. There's a lot going on at the moment. You will have, particularly local authorities, fighting fires, fixing the stuff that's currently broken. How do you help through this analysis, through understanding climate change risks and vulnerabilities? How do you help them make a case for change and sort of moving away from a reactive to a proactive approach as part of that?
Yeah, I think supporting local authorities perhaps at that broader regional level, and is there a role for combined authorities? We've seen the kind of the subnational transport bodies at least be able to help indicate those areas that they might want to think about in more detail. That collaboration partnership piece, so I've seen it where you've got different parties, including the Environment Agency. They might be doing some work, and actually they can work alongside others and local authorities to kind of bring in their knowledge and expertise and know-how about an area, and share that then with the local authority as well. So hopefully a local authority doesn't feel isolated in their personal burden. They can work with other people on their journey.
Yeah, thanks. Cara, have you got thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess from a similar perspective, local authorities as an example, there's a lot of great collaboration happening, and it's great that they're not working in silos. We're currently working with Gloucestershire County Council, and they've got Climate Leadership Gloucestershire, which is a group which brings in the NHS, Fire and Emergency Services, district councils, and the entire county council as well, which is a really positive thing to see.
Excellent. And Subu, from your perspective, national highways approach, I suppose, moving from that kind of, I suppose, reactive to proactive approach. I mean, they do have a long-term maintenance plans, called RIS2 currently, so you seem to be RIS3.
Yeah.
How do you sort of help them make the case for this sort of longer-term funding, I suppose?
I'll go beyond national highways, maybe a bit internationally. So where that is happening, we've seen positive ways. More in low and middle income countries, some of the African countries, they don't have any systems or any data in place. So externally aided, World Bank and others. So the first task is just to implement a climate resilient asset management system. That's the beginning. So when you're starting from that, then everybody is putting those data systems and processes and people in place. And it's starting from sometimes a clean state is the easiest way. I mean, it's much more simpler to break silos and do things properly. But when you have established teams and businesses and funding and budgets, it is challenging. As I said, it has to be a policy management level intervention, and then it starts from the top to break the silos.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions in the audience? If not, I'll carry on. It's fine.
How many have you got? A whole list?
Yeah,
Ready?
I mean, actually, I've got about 4 pages of questions for you. So there's a really interesting point here that you were making around. Essentially, where does the responsibility sit for understanding climate change risk and vulnerability? Say, if you imagine you've got the best part of 200 transport authorities in the UK, asking them all to undertake climate risk assessments and have some consistency across that, it feels to me like if we go down that route in the long term, you miss opportunities to, say, distribute funding where it's needed. Because otherwise you might find yourself comparing sort of apples and pears in terms of methods. So first part of the question, I suppose, is like how do we drive a consistent approach to understanding climate change risk? And Charlene, I'll start with you on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, like you say, lots of people are doing it in different ways. I was working on an Innovate UK project with the Department for Transport. It's called Ties Living Lab. It's around kind of transport efficiency. And they set up communities of practice, and one of them was climate resilience that I chaired. And it was bringing together, in this case, transport sector and Network Rail, National Highways, East West Rail, etc. And we were really trying to drill what metrics could be used, and it's surprising how difficult it is to find metrics that people feel comfortable consistently can use, and they can collect the right information that will inform it too. So I think there's a place for continued spaces like that, where there is communities or experts working together to try and get that same consistent approach, and I guess at least get the high level metrics there so people can start populating it with data. So yeah, if you've got those communities set up and can share that knowledge, because there's lots of experts, and can we bring together all our thoughts properly? And then a big thing for me is how do we then apply it? You've got this systems of systems approach. There's transport, but actually transport is often very reliant on the electrical network, and are we having those right conversations with them? Are they approaching it in the same way? And I guess again it's talking and sharing knowledge, and hopefully having someone who that is, the government, to drive that agenda in terms of making a standardised approach to that assessment.
Excellent, thanks Charlene. Cara, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I guess in terms of a standardised approach, there are definitely frameworks that already exist. So you've got the ISO framework, you've got the UK CCRA, so that's the UK's National Climate Change Risk Assessment. So there's lots of great guidance out there, but I think even Transport Scotland, as an example, we looked at risk in the screening in terms of hazard and exposure, and then in the future we moved to likelihood and impact. So even within one project, we're jumping around in terms of how we're defining risk, because there isn't that really stringent, you must do this for a climate risk assessment guidance. And I think that needs to be defined top down to a certain degree by UK government. You've got the transport appraisal guidance. Maybe there should be equivalent of that for climate change risk, where it's quite stringent in what organisations need to do, and you have sort of maybe a range of different ways of doing a risk assessment, so maybe a light touch approach and keep it proportional to each project as well. And I think also key is probably that cycle which we follow for Transport Scotland. So you've got to take it right through from screening to future and then on to adaptation and keep going through that cycle again and again quite consistently. That would be probably my best approach.
And Subu, like similarly on the data side, sort of driving consistency about how people, I suppose, collect, manage, collate, analyze data from your perspective. What are your thoughts there?
So you have inventory condition data. There are pretty much standards already in place for measuring both inventory and condition. But some assets gets priority over others, like drainage is one asset that is neglected heavily. There is more standardized methods and much more simpler, lower cost solutions needs to come in. But data also includes risk assessment. So so that's just, I'm not just talking about, so risk data also comes in, and definitely the standardized approach is something that we are really pushing or very keen on. And as Cara said, it can have different levels of sophistication depending upon the quality of data quality level that is required. It's not hard to implement in terms of technology or anything. It just needs to be enforced, and the guideline needs to be set up. And then there are already existing framework like asset management plans, and it needs to be integrated with this, and then funding has to come probably from a central level rather than looking at local authorities. That's what my current thinking is.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you. I think we've got a question from the audience, one here and one at the...
Yeah, hi. John Lamb, I chair the UK Adaptation, Biodiversity and Climate Board across all 200 highway authorities. A bit of a question and an initial comment. I really like the conversation there in terms of the need for national leadership, for a consistent, more directive approach. There is a real challenge right now in that government on the adaptation side is saying, oh, well, you in local authorities can choose your own sort of scenario. And realistically, I think there does need to be a reasonable worst-case scenario as it was. But, you know, some real positives. I want to look back at Scotland, link over to Scotland and the Scottish work, to be honest. Although, Charlene, I really do like all of your presentation, and I need to have a conversation separately. But in terms of Scotland, I guess we've got a similar situation here in England, in that the trunk road network in Scotland, it's only 6% of the network, all those 32 authorities that those roads go through, and yet they've taken a very, very linear approach. And I've got to be very mindful that Transport Scotland sit on my board. But similarly with national highways, you've got a similar scenario. They're doing a whole load of modelling and mapping associated with motorways through local communities where we all live, and unless I continue to keep pushing in there and say, look, can you show us the data, can you guide us this, there's a risk that we come out with something that's really good for 2% of the network, but actually it totally misses the point in terms of the communities where we all live, where the big risk is. I just want to try and understand in that respect how we join up that conversation and really make that happen.
Thanks, Sean.
I can
Cara,
start.
do you want to start?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. And Scotland, as an example, there's very, very remote communities. And even if you're just looking at the trunk road network, if you've cut off a small slice of road, say there's a landslide or a heat wave deteriorates the road surface and you can't use it, those remote communities that don't sit on the trunk road network are cut off ultimately. And there isn't an alternative in Scotland. So it is really key to look at. I don't necessarily have an answer for that, whether it's a case of the GIS and the spatial mapping needs to cover all roads. There's that that could be a discussion as well. I think the aim is that the adaptation plan covers those communities also, so they're not cut off, but appreciate the risk isn't necessarily mapped as well. So yeah.
Thanks. Charlene, any thoughts your side?
Yeah, I guess my thoughts around, and I think I mentioned it, is the impact piece and how do we almost value some of the infrastructure and who it's used for. And so it's quite easy to say in terms of motorways, you know, they're really well used and they're therefore more critical to us, but actually for local communities around it, they might not be using it at all. They might avoid it because it gets too busy. I'm from Bristol and the M5 used to avoid in the summer with all the caravans travelling. So it means then the other roads become really important, and that is actually an impact assessment. What is critical infrastructure maybe for communities? And you talked a lot about the stakeholder engagement. Actually, it's maybe that feedback from those communities saying, actually, this is the actual bit of really critical infrastructure for us. We don't actually use that bit of road, so if this, you know, doesn't work for us, or if there's an event, it means we can't use it, it becomes much more critical. And that becomes then nuanced. It's not just obvious data and usership. It might be actually how communities feel about the kind of infrastructure they use, potentially.
Thanks, Charlene. That's a great point, yeah. On communities, what is critical infrastructure, essentially? Yeah. What do you need to get to in terms of your homes, your jobs, get your hospitals, you know, whatever it might be, your business districts. So, Subu, you've spoken a lot about collaboration already. Is there anything else you'd like to add in response to John's question?
Yeah, so John's, see again, the key point was you are asking data from national highways. And at this point of time, it's probably not an easy for even them to give something where there is a joined up agreement. So I think the key is to push for more robust, standardized data which is accessible for all. It has to be open, and if you drive that agenda, a lot of the problems are solved if you have good data, and you can't really have excuses around that data tells the story.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you, John. I think we've got a question at the back first, and then we'll come to the front. Oh, this one. Apparently we're coming down the front first. Sorry.
Thank you. Mark Connolly from AtkinsRealis. So I have a background in design and infrastructure. A lot of my colleagues and other design organisations are here today. If there was one thing that you could ask designers, whether that's working on a maintenance scheme or a new piece of infrastructure, if there was one thing that they could do just starting out in their projects, what would that be?
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in. I think it would be for me if you could bring in someone to help you quickly do a risk assessment, understand what's most vulnerable, and then think about the design specification that might go with that. So you're hopefully kind of future-proofing that design as it goes forward. And hopefully, even to get to that design point, you've done kind of site selection, optioneering that takes into account the potential climate risks as well, which hopefully we all do, but actually, got to make sure that that step is taken as well.
Thank you. Cara, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think reiterating Charlene's point, at the very least, having an understanding of climate risk and really upskilling yourself if you're a designer and any profession really in climate risk and climate change, and understanding what that looks like into the future. And I think there's so many tools available online. It's so easy to just sort of search climate change risk in my area. You can look at flood risk, you can look at heat risk. There's many different free tools available, so I would definitely recommend that.
Excellent. And Subu,
nothing much to add, but it's the basics. It's just to do the risk assessment, and if you're designing something new, it's almost 100% sure that it is going to get flooded or the drainages are going to be in a difficult shape if you just do what you're doing right now. So if there is an opportunity to improve, do the risk assessment, and then future-proof as much as we can.
Thank you. And I think that's a key point, isn't it? And it's part of making that case for change to different authorities as well. Showing what will happen if you carry on doing as you currently do over time, you know, and that might be within the current funding period or into the next one.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you know what the climate risks and you know, vulnerabilities are, a key part of making the case for change. I think our next question was this time in the middle.
Hi, it's Ben Folser from KPMG. Quick point just on the consistency piece. We're doing a piece of work with the DFT at the moment to work with all the Tier 1 infrastructure authorities, major ports and airports, to look at how to drive consistency in climate adaptation measurement and response. So if there's any questions here around that, very happy to take that. And John, actually, in terms of the local highways piece, there might be an opportunity there to collaborate. Is actually, the question was to the panel on the role of the private sector and private finance in climate adaptation. So if you take New York MTA and what they've done pretty innovatively with their climate bond, which is effectively their insurance policy for flooding after all the floods in the metro system, I think there's possibly a role for that sort of solution here, especially in stretched public finances. How do you see the private sector getting engaged in supporting public infrastructure and resilience?
Excellent question.
Great question. I'll jump in first. Yeah, I mean, mobilising, private finance into this climate adaptation piece, I think is probably part of the solution that we need to make sure we think about making sure we've funded properly. I haven't worked on any kind of the climate finance bonds, but where we are seeing mobilisation of money, and it therefore might be a blueprint, is around nature and actually mobilising finance into nature markets. And some of that actually leaps into the climate resilience world as well, if you're talking about nature-based solutions. So we're working on some projects where actually we're looking at, let's essentially flood this area because it is a natural floodplain, and looking at channels which have been engineered straight and then they're kind of being renaturalised. So I think by creating opportunities, and it might be around, we call them more resilience, but there might be funding opportunities to link in with the nature-based solutions, and actually can you then sell sort of the credits almost for supporting climate resilience or nature-based solutions as well. So it's an emerging market for sure, and I know they've also looked at kind of the bonds approach, and I know local authorities have the ability almost within their council tax as well system, although we all know council tax is going up, but there are some opportunities if you've got a council that's willing, or a council maybe that has experienced a lot of flood events, for example, where they might be looking to mobilise more money in, so there might be bonds that they want to look to utilise that could bring that investment in as well.
Thanks, Charlene. Any thoughts from the other panelists?
Yeah, I think in terms of climate finance, there's lots of interesting things going on, especially local authorities, as Charlene mentioned. We're working with the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham currently, and sort of within their scope, they wanted to understand better what climate financing is and what they can find and beyond national government inputs, and that includes sort of setting up a green fund, so local residents can invest into a fund, and then hopefully they get a return on that once that fund closes. So yeah, local authorities are definitely exploring sort of other funding methods, and that has come across really positively, and Southwark Council in London is also using the same approach, so we might start to see more of that across local authorities.
Thank you. Subu, I don't know if there's anything you want to add from there.
No, nothing from my perspective, but where we see is in future, as more connected and autonomous vehicles come, insurance will play a part, and the current infrastructure providers will move to more like service providers, and once private sector and insurance gets involved, then this has to fall in place.
Yeah.
So not now, but probably in the future.
I mean, that insurance piece is an excellent point, not least because obviously potentially the amount of claims that this is costing particularly local authorities. I'm tempted to break the fourth wall here on the panel and ask the KPMG audience member, are you looking at insurance as part of your work as well?
Yes, we are looking at that as part of the wider point about private finance and the future of funding. Sorry, hello. We're looking at how private finance supports climate resilience more broadly. And clearly that insurance point in the case study from New York MTA is a great one in that. But we also think in the long term of roads funding, for example, in the UK, where there are potentially insurable events that could improve the resilience, we should be looking at that as part of the solution for future funding packages.
Excellent, thank you. Have we got any other questions from the audience? If not, I'll ask. I've got a couple more to wrap up. We've got a few minutes left. There was Charlene. You did mention systems thinking, and I think on our previous environment panel, someone did note that as soon as you mention systems thinking, people tend to glaze over and think it's really complicated. But these are complex problems, challenges intermingled with finance and all the rest of it, as we discussed. I'm just wondering, from the panel's perspective, if there is one thing, I suppose, if there's some basics the authorities can do here to incorporate this into their approach for decision making, what, without sort of delaying action on, in terms of what they currently obligated to meet, what would that be? So I might start with Subu, actually.
So I'm still going back to the basics. It's leadership, data sort of focused. Thinking systems of systems. When you are a local authority at that level, you can only look down. It has to start from the top. Is what where I believe national level leadership is what is missing right now. So if once it drives down, then it sort of comes down to local authorities and sub-regional transport bodies also. So that national leadership is where we would start to sort of push the agenda of the systems thinking. Because it's really, there are other priorities at local authority level right now. So it's just really challenging to get the concept even speaking.
So more back to the national leadership piece. Thank you. Yeah. I'm just going to go in reverse order, I think. So, Cara.
Yeah, I guess I probably agree with you there on systems thinking. It feels like a bit of a buzzword at the minute, but I guess if you drill into what it actually means, from my perspective, it's all about the interdependencies, which Charlene kind of spoke about earlier, and transportation is key in that. It really helps to connect so many other industries, and if the transport network is down, so many businesses are impacted. So I think it's about mapping out those interdependencies. It doesn't have to be in a complicated way, but just by engaging with different, say, utilities companies and transport authorities, you can sort of understand the common threads of where impacts are happening and where the worst impacts are happening. So yeah, I would suggest creating a simple sort of network map of that to give you that initial understanding, which can then be built on and made into, say, a more complex digital twin, for example.
Okay, thank you. Charlene?
Yeah, probably only just add that in the future, making sure it maps against kind of our decarbonisation profile as well, and the demand on electricity, and therefore where's that electricity being drawn on, and how is then our infrastructure networks relying on that. So it's that understanding of that major shift that's happening between kind of now and 2030, and feeding that into the risk assessment process as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that final comment. We're pretty much out of time. I hope we've taken what was probably quite a gloomy message you've heard from the past day and a half and turned it into actually that there are things you can do about this, and our different authorities and different organisations are looking to address the climate change challenge. Last thing, I think just please thank our panellists, and have a good rest of the conference.